And so I'm here. I'm in Nunsuch in Southern Woodford. Where are you, Teresa and Kevin? Where are you all from? Where are you right now, I should say?
I am in Knox County, so I'm very close to Pineville.
Oh, nice. Yeah,
Yep, I'm in Lexington.
nice, nice. So we got a good variety there. And it looks like we've got some folks in there. I think we can probably go ahead and start. Do we want to introduce ourselves really quick before we jump right into it? I can start. I'm Wes Blake, and I'm a writer in Kentucky, and we're talking today about my debut book, Pineville Trace.
I'm Kevin Nance. I am a writer, also a poet, and in Lexington. And I'm co-host with Jay McCoy of a show on Radio Lex called Kentucky Writers Roundtable, and we interviewed Wes on the show couple of months ago.
Mhm.
And I'm Teresa Brock, and from Kentucky, the southeastern part of the state, and I am your reader representative with all the questions.
Well, thank you so much for doing this. And it looks like it looks like some folks have kind of joined now. So thanks everybody for joining us. I'm ready to start whenever you all are. Oh, I should say too, there's a good chance like there are two cats here, Queek or Pig. They may jump in here in the frame at any moment. They might not, so don't get your expectations up, but anything could happen. We'll see.
And also, I don't see anybody chiming in on the chat. So if you don't see, if for those who are looking at, if you don't see the chat option, if you'll use your cursor and kind of float down on the bottom of the screen, a little black bar will come across the top where it has the chat option. Click that chat option so it'll come up on the right side of your screen, and that way you can introduce yourselves and then leave questions that you have for Wes as we go on.
And I'm seeing a message. It's looking like okay. It's looking like the chat is disabled. Let's see if I'm smart enough to figure this out. I'm not confident. Hold on, let me try real quick. Let's see.
I see. Chat is disabled.
Hmm. Well, how about the Q&A? Is the Q&A working? Is can someone try to ask a question under there's a Q&A box. It looks like folks were able to chime in there. Okay, I guess let's use the Q&A instead of the yeah, I'm seeing folks kind of join in there. Okay. Maybe we just use the Q&A for now as if you do instead of the chat because I'm not quite sure how to fix that real quick. I'm gonna go ahead and share this. I'm gonna stream this to Facebook as well, really quick. Okay. Actually, we can go ahead and start. I'm ready whenever you all are.
Wes, why don't you kind of tell us a little bit about the books? Because I don't know how many people that are in here have read the book already. So give us a little bit of background on the book and like really for me, how you picked the name Pineville Trace, because like that is my like I'll be in Pineville tomorrow.
Oh,
So
yeah. Yeah, nice. So yeah, this is the book right here. It's called Pineville Trace. And so that's a good question. The name I came up with that. There's if you open the book, there's kind of a sub name. So it's Pineville Trace or Frank the Missing Years was the is the whole title. But when this story really came from that area around Pineville and Pine Mountain, and this first book about this character Frank, he wound up in a minimum security prison there. For folks that haven't read it, Frank's a by the time this book starts, Frank's a former revival preacher, and he's in a minimum security prison. And there's one that it's based on is Bell County Forestry Camp, and it's right there in Pine Mountain in Pineville. And so I went there. I wrote the book and I went there. I was there for work. I was traveling and I just love that place. That place really struck me. The history of that place, Cumberland Gap is right there. It's a really beautiful place. It looks a lot like the Pacific Northwest. And so that place really struck me. I love the name of it. Pines are kind of a central image in the book, and I love the name of that. And I read a lot about, the buffalo traces and how the original Cumberland Gap, path was made by buffalo, and for thousands of years buffalo went that way. And then the Native Americans, they followed that path, and then Daniel Boone, the Native Americans kind of showed him the way, and all of a sudden, you know the Europeans knew a way to pass through there. But I just love that story. I thought that was such a cool story, how the animals kind of led the path and we just kind of followed them. But I love the multiple meanings that it has. That word trace, it's a path. It's what remains when you're left. There's multiple meanings there. So that's kind of what settled me on the title. Did I answer all your questions, Teresa? Did I miss part of
Yeah,
it?
yeah. So for me, reading this book, I felt like it was very personal to you. And like sometimes I would almost get lost in it, like I was reading a memoir. And so I have done a little digging and listened to some of your other things about the book. Um, and Frank's been around in your life for a long time.
Hmm.
So why don't you tell? Because it is like, I mean, I felt like a memoir is kind of wrong, but I knew it was, I know Frank is your guy. Like
Right.
Frank is personal to you. So can you tell us like how long Frank's been in your life?
Sure. So yeah, I know what you mean. And there's one chapter too, even to add to that feeling of memoir. I think there's that chapter early on that kind of breaks the fourth wall, and it kind of gets into the process of, the inspiration for the story. So I think that probably adds to that too. But no, you're exactly right. I've been writing about Frank for so long. I started writing about Frank in 2014. So I tell this story a lot because it's a big part of, the inspiration for this. But when I first went to, I was a high school English teacher at West Jessamine High School in Jessamine County, and I was considering, joining the Bluegrass Writers Studio, the MFA program at EKU, Eastern Kentucky University. And so I did join, and the first thing that they had going on, the first event, the first classes that I took were it was a summer residency in Portugal. So I mean that was great. I was over in Lisbon, and so at this time I didn't know anybody in the program yet because I just started in the summer, and I wanted to come out of the program with a novel. And so I was doing a lot of soul searching about what my novel would be, who my character would be. I always loved character driven fiction, so I was kind of searching for my character. And this one of the speakers there, and there's Queek. We have the first sighting. There she is. And one of the writers there was talking, and so she said that her advice was to write about what obsesses you. So write about what obsesses you, and that really struck me. I thought about that. I thought that was really important, and it's more instructive, I think, than write what you know. And so I did think about that a lot. And I remembered in high school, one of my really good friends, his great uncle was this well-known, revival preacher, and I met people that knew him, and I heard firsthand stories of what he was like, and he made such a big impression on people. I've not really encountered many people that people talk that way about, the way people talked about him, and that stuck with me because you had these stories about how authentic he was, and how he cared about people. And so you got that in addition with there were accusations of fraud as well. So you had these two sides that you heard, and it was hard to know what the truth really was. And so that was the inspiration for Frank. I love that unknowability about him. If that's a word, we'll make that a word for now. And so I love that. I love characters like that. And so that was my character at that point. I wanted to the Frank was inspired by that real life person, but I wanted to explore somebody that's really unknown and kind of figure out who he is. And writing my first novel and Pineville Trace have just continued to be a process of figuring out who he is. So he does feel like a friend of mine to some. He really does. It's kind of weird, but I've been writing about him so long. Yeah.
What did you, these, when you were writing about him before, these were short stories?
When I was writing about him before, they were, that's a really good question, Kevin. So for whatever reason, these stories about Frank wind up being these weird mixed genre, um, mixed form, I should say, mixed forms. So the novel is called Antenna, and so it was a novel in stories. So kind of like Pineville Trace is, I call it a novella in flash fiction, where it's a novella, but the individual chapters are designed to stand alone. That Antenna novel, it's the same way. It's a novel, but it's designed so that the chapters, stand alone as well. So that's
What was happening in those stories? What was going on with Frank?
So those stories in Antenna, one of them was published in Louisiana Literature Journal, for example, and it's called A Sword of Miracle, is that story. And so in that story, he's very young. He's just starting he's figuring out making his name as a revival preacher. And in that story, like the main actions is centered around he meets this woman who's legitimately dying, and she kind of has this moment talking with her, and he's kind of confronted by, how much of what he's doing is real and what are his limitations.
He's
But
specifically, he's a, you haven't used the term faith healer, but that's what he is. He's a
yes.
faith healer.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Kevin. Yes. Yep, he absolutely is. And so it just follows him. The book is really him making a name for himself. And there's a point where the trajectory of his life changes quite a bit when he goes on the radio, right? And he has a radio show that's broadcast, at this border blaster antenna in Texas that doesn't have to follow the FCC rules because it's across the border. And so he really builds his following a lot. And it kind of follows him and his brother Henry throughout that journey of making a name for themselves in the world and finding some success and just kind of riding that and seeing where it goes.
It's interesting that in the story we are told pretty early on that Frank is in this minimum security prison as a result of having been convicted of fraud. But the nature of the fraud is a little mysterious. Is that intentionally so? And I think it's fair for the reader to wonder, well, what fraud? What was the nature of it?
Sure. So it is left it is left vague. It's not really gotten into, but ultimately it's in the other novel it goes into it more. Ultimately, it was mail fraud is what the charge was, because he was healing people and he was taking money for it, and so that's where they went after him. It was mail fraud that they charged him with. But in the other novel, it goes into it a little bit more, and I kind of considered going into it more, but I wanted to leave his past more of a general background in that regard.
So
So
that's
the
why he visits Antenna in the book, then.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep, absolutely. So, the first novel sheds light on a lot of those events, and so that Antenna was a big moment in his life. He met his wife around that area, and also that was when his life really changed. Him and his brother Henry, both their lives changed quite a bit when they got that deal with the radio station, and really, their reach grew exponentially. Yeah.
but he has a kind of crisis of faith uh, at some point earlier on in Pineville Trace, in which he kind of confronts the sense of being a performer. He becomes conscious of being an actor, uh, putting on a show for people. That feels pretty, foundational for the book. Could you maybe even read that section if you can, if
Sure. Um,
where yeah.
I think I could find that really quickly. Hold on. Which one would that be? I don't know if I'd be able to pull that passage up really quickly, Kevin. I'm sorry. I don't know if I can find that really
He
quickly.
is
I'm sorry.
conscious of having perpetrated a fraud, of
Absolutely. And I agree with you.
than what he claimed to be.
Right. Yeah, I don't think I could find that really quickly. I'm sorry.
So
Um,
for me reading it, I feel like prison freed Frank. It was like a time for him to reflect on what he had done wrong and the fact that he was out trying to heal all these other people, but who was looking after him? Buffalo. That's all he had.
right,
That's
right. Yeah, that's true. There's an element of that, right? Where he's tasked with helping all these other people, but he's kind of not, he's not really doing much for himself.
So when you write a novella, or so it's the flash fiction. So can you kind of explain to the readers who don't really know that? So it's a kind of a twofold question. The first part is, why do you lean on that way to write? Because it's good. And how hard is it to take out the fluff? Like, how many times when you're writing it are you saying, nope, nope, can't put this in there because it is down and dirty, like you go, 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 and every sentence means something.
Yeah, that's a good question, Teresa. The form kind of forces that. With the novella form, you've got to you have so much less space. It's such a smaller form, so you have to get to it in a way. And because they're the what are, because the chapters are flash fiction stories where they're designed to stand alone, you have to kind of get into something that's meaningful or something that has its own narrative arc. Usually they're building character. But because they're short and they have to kind of stand on their own, the form forced me to kind of to really get into moments like that were meaningful. So I think that's a big part of it. I read something. I can't remember where I read it actually, but I read I read another writer made the comment that if you have something important to say, don't save it. Don't save it and build up to it, right? Just 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 get to it. Don't save the best part. Get right to it. And that struck me as a pretty good idea. It's kind of scary because then it's like, now what? But I did practice that quite a bit. If there was something that I felt was important about the character or a big moment, I didn't wait and build up to it. I made it happen. I just went right into it. And I think that helped create immediacy too.
So the main storyline of the book, and it's ironic that it doesn't happen near Pineville Trace. He leaves that area early on in the book. He escapes or just walks away from this prison that he's in, and the book is sort of a road trip or a series of road trips. And he goes all the way up north, all the way to Canada, and he has these sort of visions, or at least a vision of what he's looking for. What is Frank looking for, would you say, both in a geographic sense and perhaps otherwise?
You're right. Visions play a big part. He is chasing these visions. And so to answer your first part of that question, the first vision, the very concrete vision, he's got this vision of this cabin surrounded by pines in the wilderness, and that's what he's looking for the whole time. And there's what I don't think this is giving too much away, but he like finds something that's almost close, and that's not enough, and he kind of risks life and limb to find exactly the vision he has in his mind, the place he has in his mind. So he's following a vision. And secondly, I feel like he's trying to so this story is kind of that structure of, a person goes on the mountain, right, to find out who they are and kind of find their truth. And this story fits in that mold, that archetype. And so I think a lot of what he's searching for is to his authentic. The word authentic is a bit overused, but I think he's looking for his true self. And you had mentioned earlier he's confronting himself for being an actor. And I wish I could find that passage because that's fun. It's a fun passage to read. But he's confronting himself from that for the artifice of it. And he's kind of fallen into this practice of of playing a part and being an actor. And I think what he's searching for, to get back to your original question, is he's searching to get past that, to find who he really is. And I think there's something universal about this. I think we, to different degrees, not quite as dramatically as Frank, but I think all of us have to fit some mold in our work lives, and to kind of fit a mold in a lot of ways. And so yeah, he's trying to get past all that.
But that has to happen in this specific place, which is a real place, it turns out. And he
Yes.
does find it, right? But that's not the end of the story, not even close.
Right, right. And that kind of goes back to what Teresa had asked about how did, how the book sometimes gets right to the immediacy of things. The temptation was to end the story there, right? But I knew what I kind of discovered what would happen there, and just, uncovered that, and kept moving forward and kept moving forward.
There's
So,
this,
oh,
I was going to say, I'm sorry, Teresa, I was going to
you're,
say about Buffalo, about the cat. I hope am I stepping on you, Teresa, with this
nope,
question about the
nope.
cat? So what's interesting, and I think Jay McCoy said this on our show, that the most important relationship that unfolds and develops in the course of the book is the relation of Frank and Buffalo, the cat. The cat simply shows up at the prison and then just kind of accompanies him every step of the way on this journey. And that becomes, in a lot of ways, the centerpiece of the book, the relationship with the cat. What is your cat thing? And I mean, I know you love cats. Maybe that's part of it. But could you talk about how Buffalo sort of works in the story?
Sure. So I always loved books when I was growing up. I always loved like those Jack London books, where you've got like this nature,
Right, bang.
yeah, White Fang, right? And
Yep.
so we had this dog, Karen Terrier. She's a Karen Terrier. Her name was Daisy. And so when I was really little, like I don't know, I think maybe like 5, 6, probably too old to be doing something this dumb. But what I did was I would sit on my skateboard, because it's the '80s and skateboards were, the thing. And so I would hold on to her leash, and like I would pretend like she was on like a, we were in like White Fang, and she was a sled dog. And that didn't go very well, because if you go down a hill, then the skateboard goes faster. That didn't work well. But to your point, I love stories like that. And Steinbeck has this book called Travels with Charlie. I love stories like that. And it's a bit risky, because you've got to avoid sentimentality and cliche. So it's a bit risky, to try to do it well. But I love those stories. I love cats. I've always loved cats. What So when I was a kid, my grandmother Nanny, she had a cat named Feisty, and Feisty was never nice to us. She would just like claw at us, because we were kids and didn't really know how to approach a cat, in a quiet way. Me and my brother Miles, but I don't know, for whatever reason, I always loved cats. I just thought that was the coolest thing, and that's what I wanted. So I always wanted a cat. When I was a kid, my parents bribed me to quit sucking my thumb. They said, I think I mentioned this, we were talking at, the other interview, but it's true. The one thing they knew that would bribe me effectively, they're like, we'll get you a pet cat if you do this. And then we found out my brother was allergic, like really bad allergic, so they couldn't. But then when I started dating my wife Natalie, when I met her, she had a cat, and so we've had cats, for a long time. So she brought cats back to me. Yeah. But
And
you're exactly right. The friendship, like kind of the friendship between Buffalo and Frank, is a big part of that book, because there's a lot of it's, he's isolated a lot of the time, and I think the relationship is between him and his past, and his inner life in Buffalo, and maybe the other major character is probably, nature, the physical environment.
and there's a kind of bond that also feels a little bit mystical between man and cat, right? That I don't. I'm not particularly a cat person, but I know that many people are, and they talk about cats as these mysterious creatures that they have some kind of strange bond with. Certainly, Frank has a pretty, I mean, he's very, very close to this cat.
He is. And I feel like too there's books that a lot of books kind of we just talked about a few of them, but a lot of books, have kind of that story with the dog, but not many have that story with a cat. And I always love this story, you always there's stories in the gorge about the this cat. There's I think a couple of cats, but that would always hike with people and it would show up on the trail and just it was like a stray cat that would always hike with people. So there's cats out there. We've got a neighbor cat next door that will kind of roam around with us out here in our little farm a little bit.
Hmm.
So through Frank's travels with Buffalo, the pine tree, the evergreen, it keeps coming up. Like that's a very important part. Even when he's walking through places when there are other types of trees and he lands on that evergreen. So I have a theory why he lands on an evergreen, but what is the reason that I mean, is I know that has to be something specific to
Um,
that type of tree.
Right. To be honest with you, Teresa, I've always been drawn to pine trees, and I don't know exactly why. When I was really young, I stayed with my mom's nanny quite a bit, and she had these huge pine trees at the back of her house, and I would always hang out there. It was like always where I wanted to be. But I've always been drawn to that tree. When I wrote this book, a lot of it I would get up really early in the morning and write first thing. And a lot of it I kind of followed my intuition quite a bit because I would have to start a new story. A lot of times one chapter, one flash fiction story would follow the other. And to be honest with you, it's a little bit mysterious to me why I followed. I didn't set out to make, well, I guess let me start over. The title of the book being born from Pineville, I think that was there. And so some of those early images kind of led the story, kind of help decide where it would go. But I've always been drawn to pine trees. I met a reader at an event. We did an event in Massachusetts, South Hadley, Massachusetts, with Jeff Parker at Odyssey Bookstore, and it was a really, really, really fun event. And I was talking to a reader afterwards, and she knew a ton. She was kind of expert on Native American mythology and what a lot of plants and trees meant in that context. And she said that actually the Native Americans, the pine tree is very eastern white pine in particular is very important to them. It represents healing, and so it's a very important tree to Native Americans. I didn't know that when I wrote it.
I felt like it was like a stability thing for him because it doesn't change. It is evergreen. And that's what Frank needed in his life at the time was that because he didn't have anything.
I
And
agree.
what's with the gray suit? So is there something that I missed with the gray suit? Like he always has this gray suit. So was that like his security blanket?
I think that's probably true. I think that's probably true. I think that's almost it was almost a crutch for him. So yeah, security blanket would fit. And back to your point about, the pine trees not changing. I think he is drawn to the stability of that. And he's kind of afraid of everything changing and he has no stability. And I think that's something he hangs on to. But so I agree with what you said. But yeah, I think that in a way, yeah, that suit does kind of, it's like, I feel like it's almost like a crutch for his identity. Like it's something he wants to escape but go back to because it's kind of a symbol of him at his peak. And so that was the suit that he wore when he was in the first novel, when, he was outwardly kind of at the peak of his, career as a faith healer and a revival preacher. That was kind of what symbolized, success to him.
So you're getting some questions on here too, but so here's my zinger, okay?
Okay, I'm ready.
Describe your novel in 8 seconds.
Describe it in 8 seconds.
Yeah, tell me what you wouldn't even know. You've got 8 seconds.
8 seconds. Okay, I would just say it's a man that escapes his past by following a cat named Buffalo. Is that 8 seconds?
I'm
How
going to
am
say,
I on time? How am I on time?
something about the pine trees. It kind of reminded me of Twin Peaks. I don't know if you ever saw that show. Uh, and there's been some talk about it ever since the director David Lynch died recently. But Agent Cooper comes to Twin Peaks, and one of the first things he asks is, "What kind of pine trees are these you all have here?" And there's something mysterious, and you see the trees in the opening sequence kind of swaying in a spooky sort of way, and it becomes a kind of kind of sinister. They have a sinister quality, at least in David Lynch's vision, and I think we have to say this whole story. I won't. Maybe sinister is not the right word, but there's a darkness. I mean, this is not a happy, road journey. This is a kind of heart of darkness story in which the main character is in search of something so elusive and so, it's not even clear that it's real or what, but he's chasing his own ghosts, his own demons in some ways. I think in the chat, Michael Mao has some very good questions. He actually has three in a row. Maybe you could look at the Q&A. And
Sure.
uh, and I think the question that in his first question about the meta chapter is a good one. Why did you feel compelled to include that? And I know from talking to you before that it was a question, in your mind about whether you should include it, taking the reader out of it and all of that.
Hmm. Sure, that's a good question. Actually, Michael Mao is another Bluegrass Writers Studio grad like Jay McCoy and I, and he actually is a voice actor and a writer and a podcaster as well. And he narrated the audiobook. So if anyone has listened to the audiobook, this is our narrator and producer here. So yeah, that's a good question. So why I included that meta chapter and
Maybe
like
you could explain to the listeners, the viewers, what the chapter says first. What does
sure.
it actually say?
Should I read part of that? I can
Sure.
find that really quick.
Yeah.
Okay. Should I read the whole thing, Kevin, or is that too long? What do you think?
Well, just enough to give the reader an idea.
Okay. Okay, so this chapter is called Kentucky 190, which is the name of the road that drives by the minimum security prison. Kentucky 190. I'm sitting at my writing desk listening to an audio recording that I made last month while driving on Kentucky 190 through Pine Mountain. On February 8th, 2022, I hear myself talking in a voice edged with tired and manic energy about the new book I will write about Frank Russet. Frank is the main character for my first novel. I say the first lines of the book will be, he imagined a town he'd never been to, a town named Pineville. Maybe there was a house on the hill, around a curving drive, at the top of Cedar Street, backing up against the ridge. Later in the recording, simply titled KY 190, I hear myself quote another opening. I imagined a town full of pines, a town I've never been to. I imagine a house on a hill, Cedar Street. The house backs up against the ridge. In the recording, I'm driving down the winding Kentucky 190. The road weaves and winds through Pine Mountain. The highway is all steep climbs, descents, sharp curves. Towering pines spring up beside the road. It looks like Oregon. So many tall old pines with broad, stable trunks. When I see them, they make me feel relaxed. My destination is Bell County Forestry Camp. In my novel, Frank Russet, the main character, stayed there after he was sentenced for fraud. So that's a taste of it. That's the meta chapter that Michael's asking about. So the reason I included that, I there first of all there was just a really strange coincidence that happened that I describe in the book that really did happen. Frank, the exact car model that Frank drives it's an old model car. I saw it, a Buick LeSabre, and so it's black Buick LeSabre 1950s model, late 50s, and so I saw a car, you know, approximately that range of Buick LeSabre, which was very odd on Pine Mountain. You know how isolated that place is. So that was very bizarre. that I saw that as I was had just gotten the idea to write this story. And so I thought that was so strange. It would almost be interesting enough to share. And another thing that really pushed me towards including
Was that a sign, Wes?
maybe,
Is
right?
that the universe talking to you?
It certainly seemed that way. It certainly
Or
seemed like,
somebody talking to you?
yeah.
Maybe it's Frank talking to you.
That's right. Or maybe Buffalo sent that sign. It was a weird coincidence at the very least. But I kind of wanted to include that. I had read James Salter, A Sport and a Pastime. I had read that recently, and the style of that book, I just love the I loved how it was written. I love the sentences, his prose style affected me quite a bit. And also that book does that. It kind of there's one moment where it kind of breaks that fourth wall between, the writer and the story. And I loved how it did that. Another example that I always like how Gurney Norman's Divine Rights trip at the very end of that novel, Gurney or the character calls Gurney and says, "Hey Gurney, what do we do? We're stuck. What do we do? And so he calls the writer Gurney to figure out, how he's gonna figure out his problem. So I always liked it. Kurt Vonnegut does that too. I loved it when books did that because it almost puts it puts this mark on the story and kind of leaves the reader thinking about it in a different way. And perhaps kind of to Teresa's point earlier, where it felt memoir-ish. I think in fiction we're always wondering in fiction, like what part of this is real and what part of this is made up and what parts are from the author's life. And so I think that it all plays into that. So
But there is a momentary, it's the opposite of a suspension of disbelief. What would you call it? A disbelief that enters the story, and then you have to sort of resuspend it later on.
yes, yeah, you're exactly right. That's well put. I agree with that. Should we go to Michael's other question?
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. So the question is, when talking to the car salesman, Frank admits, I never knew how to really help them. Sometimes I thought I did, but it had nothing to do with what I was selling them, not really. So the question from that is, to what degree is Frank's painful journey an attempt at atonement? And I feel like there's certainly an element of atonement there. I think Frank, in that moment, it kind of reveals how Frank, one thing that he regrets is that, and he's not even so concerned about the fraud charge and what it was, right? That's not really sticking in with him. What's really sticking with him is, how did I help people or hurt people, and how could I help them? And so I think that he's both trying to atone for that and trying to figure that out. Should we go to more audience questions?
Yeah, you've got that one about Orion. That's a really
Yeah.
that's a good one.
Oh, sure. So yeah, Orion, there's several stories about Orion, and they do not paint Orion in a good light, any of them really, and any of them at all, period. And so it's interesting that, Orion is this character who's remembered, who's in the stars, just remembered for thousands of years. Yet if you really dig into the stories of Orion, which are not really that well publicized, it's a lot like Frank's story. You've got this story that's not so flattering. And so I was drawn to that. I was also drawn to that really, I feel like Orion gets at one of Frank's biggest fears, and that I think that is not being remembered. And so it drives at that. And the Orion kind of haunts him throughout the novella. It's always there, almost like the pines. It's always there. Something that he can rely on. I see one more question from Dan Rosenson. Um, was there a section that details the pine wood floor in a cabin? Yeah, there absolutely is. Frank seemed very close to a returning theme. Was Buffalo a foreshadow to Frank's life? Um, yeah, I can see that. I think there's a lot of connection between Buffalo and Frank as far as where he's going and where he's been. I think their paths are connected in a lot of ways. Um, And the second part is, how did you know that a cat was light enough to walk on the snow without sinking in? Nice. It's been a while since I read that. Yeah. Buffalo, during that time, she was pretty thin. So I think that's the main thing. I love that.
So maybe we probably need to be kind of wrapping it up, but I want to know what's next for you. So will you stick with this same novella theme, this size? Because it seems to really fit you as a person. Like just this one interview, I'm thinking I can't, I mean, I can imagine you wanting to try other things and do all this, but I think this fits you very well. And will you stick with, who are we going to get next? Like, do you have plans for another Frank or?
Sure. So to your point, I love the novella form. I really do. I think that this is one of my thoughts that I probably express too often, but I love novellas. I suspect a lot of readers do. I mean, the novella form is kind of having a moment with Claire Keegan, in particular. But if Kevin and I talked about this on Kentucky Writers Roundtable a bit too. Um, you know, Novellas like A River Runs Through It by Norman Maclean, Legends of the Fall by Jim Harrison. And you could go on and on. These are memorable movies were made out of these novellas, and I think there's a reason for that. I think that form, it gives enough space to really get into a story and to really get into a character, but there's no fluff, right? It's all killer, no filler, right? And so I love that form. I always have. I think there's a disconnect, and here's my argument. I think there's a disconnect. I don't think the publishing company doesn't love novellas as much as readers do. And I think they're wrong, frankly. I think that readers, like the publishing company says, you need to have three novellas, to make a book worthwhile. And I disagree. And I think a lot of readers do. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to publish this with a small press, is because I wanted it to stand alone. I wanted it to be, just as it is. This was my intent for this book. To your point about what's next, I have a lot of fun writing in new forms. It's fun for me. It keeps it interesting. It's a challenge, and so the first novel about Frank, I'm still looking for a home for that. I've been kind of busy with a book tour and writing another book, and I haven't really been getting sending it out as much as possible. But I'm looking for a home for that book. I've always that book is special to me, and I'd like to connect it with readers. So I'm looking for a good home for that book. That's more of a traditional length novel, Teresa. It's still on the short side of a novel because I personally prefer like Dennis Johnson novels. Like a lot of his later novels they're really short. I wouldn't consider them novella, but they're shorter. And I think readers like that too. I know I do as a reader. And there's something they have, like that sticking quality, like they can stick with you in a way that sometimes longer novels don't. And I think that appeals to me. Another book that I'm writing, actually, I have the manuscript right beside me on the desk, but the working title is To Bury, and that's a story about there's this girl, her name is Jamie, and she has this traumatic childhood, and she sees a way out. In order to find her way out, she has this calling to be a mystic or a psychic or an intuitive, and so she kind of learns that path, and that's kind of her journey. It's a coming of age um, novel, and it's more of a traditionally, as far as the length of the novel, it's more of a traditional novel. But those are kind of the two main things that I'm working on right now, and I started writing To Bury February 2024. So I'm on my third round of revisions now, and I mean it's got a lot of time. It'll be a long time before it's done, but I'm having a lot of fun with it, and I like Jamie as a character. She's interesting to me. I'm excited for readers to meet her, and yeah, that's kind of it. I feel like I'm going on and on at this point.
I think that's it. I think we're good. I mean, I could keep talking, but you do not want that.
Well, I'll tell you what, thank you so much, Kevin and Teresa. Thank you so much for your time and for your insightful questions. And everybody who joined us, thank you so much for hanging out with us on a Thursday night in February. We really appreciate it. Oh, I see. Will you come to DC for a signing at the Crown and Crow? Absolutely. Absolutely. Answer is yes. Well, thank you all so much. I appreciate it.
Bye.
Y'all have a good night.